When I was 3 years old, I burned my whole hand. I tell my 3.5-year-old the other night at dinner. For some reason, we are trading burn stories, although I don't think she's ever actually gotten burned herself. I was roasting marshmallows and grabbed the roasting stick, sliding my whole hand down to get the marshmallow off. "Look," I said to her, "you can still see I have a scar right here," I say, pointing at the faint marks that remain between my thumb and forefinger. She looks carefully at that faint scar, maybe a little uncertain of what it is she is supposed to be seeing, then turns to her papa, who is beginning to tell of his own worst burn ever. "But do you have a scar?" she interrupts him insistently. "No, I don't think so," he replies, and she immediately loses interest. What does the memory even matter if it is not carried physically on his body? We carry our histories in so many different ways. In scars, literal and figurative, in the crinkles by our eyes and the worry lines on our foreheads, in hearts broken and patched back together, in gray hairs and in memories. These marks, internal and external, tell our stories, the passing of our days. That little scar on my hand tells the story of those 10 seconds on that summer night when all the adults were paying attention to something else, and I took it into my own hands to retrieve my toasted marshmallow. But it also tells the story of the care given to me afterwards. What I remember most about that night was the speed with which my little hand was plunged into the cool lake water, soothing it until ice could be found. I remember waking up every half hour that night, as soon as the ice melted, wailing, and every time someone rushed to bring me more. I remember my mother carefully examining the burn the next morning. And I remember spending years being very, very careful around any kind of flame. Our bodies and our hearts are shaped by all that we encounter, all that we experience. We become who we are today because of who we were, because of what we chose, and because of what happened without our consent. When we look back on our lives, we can trace the path that got us here today. Here is where I decided to move to this place. Here is where I learned to love. Here is where the unexpected came along and took away everything. We hold these histories, these stories that created us in so many different ways. Some of it we talk about with pride. Some we hide away in our hearts. Some we name a little guiltily. And some we cannot bear to name, for the pain is still there, just as fresh as it ever was. In seminary, in our training on sermon writing, we are told to preach from our scars, not our wounds. Do not share your story until it is not so fresh, until you have done your processing, until you have made meaning from it, until you can share what you learned and how you grew. I see the wisdom in this advice, and I have repeated it myself. My job is not to bleed all over this pulpit, after all. It is to hold up hope, to offer meaning in a life that seems too often to be devoid of it. And at the same time, I wonder how this kind of advice plays right into the tendency of our modern American culture to skip past the suffering and rush into the potential for growth. I think this is one of the reasons why we love those images of kintsugi, those Japanese bowls with their cracks filled with gold. We like to imagine ourselves this way, with our mistakes, our tragedies, simply making us better humans, worth it for all the learning, for the ways that they have made us wise. And it fits right into the narrative that our Unitarian ancestors had of the world, that of progress onward and upward forever. We are ever improving ourselves and our world, they said, always forward, never backward, moving steadily to the ultimate goal, the ideal human being, the beloved community. And so when bad things happen, we rush into the meaning-making, longing for a reason, immediately seeking out how it is that this bad luck might turn itself into something good, something that gets us closer to our goal. We say, look at what we have learned. Look at how we have grown. We don't want to have suffered needlessly, and so we try to explain it. I have seen this tendency manifest itself in this pandemic time. Just weeks into it, maybe days, people were already writing about all the ways that this pandemic was going to change the world for the better. Before we even knew the true scope of what we were in for, we were already saying, this is good. We needed to slow down. Look at the clear skies, the extra family dinners, the ways we are being forced to confront injustice because it is suddenly so clear. There is a piece of this that is about survival. Sometimes it is just too much to face what we are going through. Sometimes we need that buffer. We need that hope. But also, how do we slow down and let ourselves sometimes just experience the pain? When we are told that everything always has to be getting better and better, how can we acknowledge that sometimes it just isn't? That there are things that we thought would be possible that now never will be. That sometimes a door closing is just that, without the immediate hope of another door opening just beside it. Memoirist and historian Kate Bowler writes about our insistence on immediate meaning-making in her latest book, No Cure for Being Human. Kate is a historian with a specialty in studying the prosperity gospel, the birthplace of the idea that we can all live our best life now if we just believe. She is also a cancer survivor. At 35, she was diagnosed with stage 4 colon cancer and given less than 2 years to live. She writes, Americans love to say that they have no regrets. From the trivial to the traumatic, it seems impossible to acknowledge that sometimes you wish you could just go back. That affair, no regrets. Giving up that career, never let that bother me. Celebrities who are interviewed after an explosive scandal squirm their way through questions until they can deliver that final line. But it made me who I am today. We are the sum of our experiences, the story goes, and require no retrospection. The road behind us could never have led anywhere but here. When I study the self-help industry, she writes, cataloging its thousands of bestsellers, I can't help but feel intoxicated by these grand narratives of progress. Nothing is impossible if you believe. The faces on the book jackets smiling behind titles like The School of Greatness or Unleash the Power Within are there to remind you that you can always fix your life. Eat this and you won't get sick. Lose weight and you will never be lonely. Pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. We are a culture racing towards better tomorrows, but suffering is the slow work of attrition. She goes on to say, is it bitter or unkind to want everyone to remember what I can't forget? Who wants to be confronted with the reality that we are all a breath away from a problem that could alter our lives completely? A friend with a very sick child said it best, I am everyone's inspiration and no one's friend. I am asked all the time to say that given what I have gained in perspective, I would never go back. Who would want to know the truth? Before was better. How many of us could look back on our lives and name a moment like that? That moment when before was absolutely better. Yes, we have learned. Yes, we have grown. Yes, we are who we are today because of all that has happened to us, the joyful and the terrible. But that doesn't mean we didn't suffer. That doesn't mean we still wouldn't take it all back. So how do we live with this? How do we hold the good and the bad in our lives, our histories, without either minimizing our suffering or getting lost in it? For as much as we don't want to rush into meaning making, we also don't want to get stuck, to stop moving forward. Just as our bodies cannot survive with gaping wounds, so too can our hearts not survive without some scar tissue growing to hold it all together. Perhaps, like so much else, it all begins with love. 12 years ago, when I first spoke from a pulpit, it was to share a remembrance at a memorial service for a dear friend who had died tragically, suddenly, and far too young. Luckily, I wasn't a minister yet because I broke all the rules, speaking that day from a wound that was all too fresh, without any understanding of what this new world looked like yet, where this new bend in the path might take me. As I wrote that remembrance, feeling at a loss, I turned to the wisdom of music, as I often do in the times when words don't feel like enough. I turned to the words of Emily Saliers of the Indigo Girls, the words that Anne and Lindsay just sang so beautifully for us. But I don't know where it all begins, and I don't know where it all will end. We're better off for all that we let in. Our lives are strung between an unremembered beginning and an uncertain end. And all we can do in the in-between times is let it all in and see what becomes of us. In that moment of grief 12 years ago, all I knew for certain was my deep gratitude for that friendship, for all that that dear one had taught me, for the way that she showed me how to love extravagantly and boldly. I was not better for having lost her, but I was better for having known her, for having opened my heart and allowed it the vulnerability of breaking. Quaker teacher Parker Palmer shares this Hasidic tale of the importance of a broken open heart. A disciple asked the Rebbe, why does the Torah tell us to place these words upon our hearts? Why does it not tell us to place these holy words in our hearts? The Rebbe answers, it is because as we are, our hearts are closed, and we cannot place the holy words in our hearts. So we place them on top of our hearts, and there they stay until one day the heart breaks and the words fall in. Perhaps then we are not meant to be meaning-making machines, reaching always for that best life now, but instead to be hearts broken open, ready for love to pour in alongside the heartache and the pain. Perhaps we are meant to stand naked in front of the mirror and declare ourselves beautiful, to set aside our judgment and just say yes. It is a vulnerable thing to live in this world knowing you could die at any moment, knowing that at any moment your whole world could be upended by death or disease, pandemic or earthquake. It is quite simply a vulnerable thing to be human. We cannot solve life after all, no matter how hard we might try, and we certainly cannot solve death. And yet here we are, living and loving anyway. Here we are saying, wow, and thank you, finding hope even when it seems absurd to hope anymore. Here we are surviving on the edge of our understanding with broken open hearts. Not better for our suffering, but certainly better for letting it all in, for letting the love in, despite it all. May it be so. We come with praise and thanks for all that is our life. As we leave this place, let us leave with gratitude for all that we have let in our lives. But let us also leave acknowledging that there are some befores that were better, that we can be grateful without diminishing our suffering, that we can let in the love with hearts broken open. May you go in peace, go in love.